I have Crohn's disease, and in front of me is pretty much all of the food I've ever taken on backpacking trips. But not all of it has worked for me, and I found that out the hard way several times. So how can you pick out the right foods for yourself and avoid making the same mistakes that I have? Backpacking with Crohn's disease means food isn't just fuel. It can decide whether a trip ends early or actually works. So I'm going to show you what foods work for me on pretty much every single backpacking trip I take. Okay, so let's clean off this table and go through everything one by one. Alright, that's a little bit better. But first, I need to go over one important thing, and that is I am not a registered dietitian. I'm only pointing out the foods that I have found to work for myself, but that doesn't mean that these foods are going to work for you, and I would recommend trying out everything on your own to make sure that the food does actually work for you before you end up going into the backcountry and relying on that food to keep you going. So now that we've got that out of the way, let's get started. All right, so what are my goals when I'm looking for good backpacking food that works with me with having Crohn's disease? Well, it's pretty simple. I look for 4 main groups. Number 1 is simple carbohydrates, followed by low sugars, and then high protein, and finally, clean fats. Now, just from hearing this list, you're probably already asking yourself, how can you have both simple carbohydrates and low sugar? Well, let me break it down. My goal while packing backpacking food is to pack enough food and energy to get me throughout the day without causing miserable inflammation. This means eating food that is easy to digest but still packing enough calories to keep me moving and having enough protein to help my muscles recover. But the tricky part is just that. How can you pack enough protein, calories, and even electrolytes while maintaining an easy to digest diet and avoid cramming loads of unhealthy food into your body? Well, spoiler alert, you're gonna have some unhealthy foods. I just haven't been able to come across a good, simple diet for people with Crohn's disease that doesn't involve some kind of risk. But still, you don't have to follow this diet. It's only a suggestion, and I can't stress that enough. Well, first, I'm gonna focus on the easy to digest part. Simple carbohydrates are easier for the digestive system to break down because they are lower in fiber. Most simple carbohydrates include things like white rice, white noodles, mashed potatoes, and candies. And I found that a lot of simple carbohydrates like white rice and even ramen work very well with my system. But again, that's my system. It's not going to work for everybody. To know for sure what works for you, I'd recommend trying a simple diet at first to establish a basis of what works with your system, and then slowly expand from there. But you probably noticed that I mentioned candies as a simple carbohydrate, even though I'm aiming for a low sugar diet. First, it's important to note that simple carbohydrates are also considered sugars. The reason that candies are a little different here is because they often have large amounts of added sugars. Added sugars are like scooping out a teaspoon of sugar and dumping it into your cake mix, as opposed to simple carbohydrates, like white rice for example, which still has the sugar in it. It's not an added sugar, it's just stripped away from the fiber that would actually make it be considered a complex carbohydrate. So, do I eat candy? The short answer is yes, but only in small amounts, sporadically throughout the day. The reason I'm avoiding too much added sugar is because too much of it at once can really irritate my system. This means I'll pack a few candy snacks in my bag to eat throughout the day as I'm hiking. These act as instant energy and are really good mood lifters whenever the hiking feels redundant and difficult. My favorite candies are Nerd Gummy Clusters, but try out different ones and find out which ones work for you. Okay, so those are the carbohydrates I eat, but what about protein? You see, protein is very important in backpacking, and even more important for those who thru hike. It's what will allow your muscles to recover whenever you fall asleep. My go-to protein sources are tuna and chicken packets for meals, and the Cliff and Kind bars for snacks sporadically throughout the day. I would argue that eating enough protein throughout the day is just as important as what you eat at camp, because it will allow you to feel fuller while hiking and will allow for a bulk supply of your protein. For instance, if you eat 4 protein bars that have 15 grams of protein in them throughout the day, you'll get 60 grams of protein from snacking alone. And 4 protein bars is a relatively small amount. For the chicken and tuna packets, I'll usually pack about 2 to 3 for each dinner and pack them in with my noodles or rice. By doing all this, I usually consume about 115 to 140 grams of protein per day. And if you're unsure about how much protein you'll need, a good starting point to get a rough estimation is to consume about 1.5 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. For instance, if you weigh 175 pounds or 79 kilograms, aim for at least 115 grams of protein. But that is still a fairly low amount for backpacking, and I would recommend trying to get more if you can. Specifically, how much more really just depends on you and how your body recovers. And I also understand that protein bars and chicken and tuna packets just simply aren't going to be enough for most backpackers. And that's why I would suggest supplementing your diet with things like protein powder. Protein powder can be a scary concept for a lot of people with Crohn's disease because a lot of it can really irritate your system. I found that animal-based protein powder, or really anything that is lactose-free, works best for me. My favorite is MRE lactose-free whole food protein powder. Just pack a scoop or two per day and mix it with some powdered goat's milk or water. Alright, moving on to fats. Fats are generally considered the most important macronutrient for backpacking meals because they're the most calorically dense. You see, every gram of fat contains 9 calories, whereas for protein and carbs, every gram that you consume is only going to have 4 calories. This means that if you only have, let's say, 4 grams of fat, as opposed to 4 grams of either carbohydrates or protein, 4 times 9 is 36, then you're going to get 36 calories from the 4 grams of fat, as opposed to the 16 calories that you're going to get from either the protein or carbohydrates. To sum it up, that means the fat is going to be much lighter than the other macronutrients. However, too many fats or consuming any of the wrong fats can be catastrophic. Unsaturated fats are generally easier to digest than saturated fats. That's why I usually stick to a small amount of either olive oil or ghee butter. Just be careful not to add too much. And again, test it out at home before you go on your trip. Okay, so what are my other safe foods? Sun chips, fruits in moderation, and breads of pretty much any kind as long as they don't have things like raisins inside of them. Alright, so that's all of my safe foods. So what have I actually learned to avoid? These are the foods that trigger my system. Number 1, spicy foods. It's pretty simple. If it's spicy, I avoid it. If I'm not sure if it'll be spicy, I'll look for ingredients like chili powder, cayenne, or red pepper flakes. For me, anything more than about 500 milligrams of chili powder, 200 milligrams of cayenne, or more than 60 milligrams, which is about 8 flakes of red pepper flakes, is too much for me. Number 2, high fiber foods. And a quick note, if you don't have Crohn's disease or some sort of dietary restriction, you generally want to stick to high fiber foods. But if you do have some sort of dietary restriction, limiting the amount of high fiber foods you eat can be very important. I found that anything like fig bars, dehydrated or freeze-dried fruits, some types of protein bars, and excessive amounts of beans are generally good to avoid. But the beans part is a little bit tricky because refried beans do actually work very well for me. This is because refried beans oftentimes don't include all of the skin that regular brown beans would. Less fiber equals easier to digest. Just remember, by eating less fiber, you could be subjecting yourself to diabetes onset down the road. So again, I am not a dietitian. I'm only sharing what foods I've found work best for me while in the backcountry. And then the third thing that I've learned to pretty much avoid or maintain the best I can is lactose. And if you have Crohn's disease or IBD, or if you're just simply lactose intolerant, you already know the risks associated with lactose. Personally, it doesn't sit very well with me, but I do really love some good ice cream, especially when I come into town when I'm doing a resupply. And that's the reason I always carry some Lactaid pills with me. Anytime I want ice cream or lactose in general, I just pop a Lactaid pill and I'm good to go. But remember, oftentimes where there's lactose, there's either a lot of added sugars or a lot of fats. So what other foods do I avoid? Beef jerky, excessive amounts of cheeses, lots of chocolates, and trail mix. And I avoid trail mix because most trail mixes include raisins, which are just dehydrated grapes, and they're gonna have a lot of fiber, which personally does not sit very well with me. And finally, I'd like to point out a misconception I've heard a lot, which is a nutrient that you should try to avoid too much of if you have something like Crohn's disease, and that is a high amount of sodium. And while avoiding excessive amounts of sodium may be good for some people, I've found from personal experience it really doesn't make much of a difference, and it can actually cause a negative impact on my hiking. And I'm pretty happy about this, because the reality is a lot of backpacking food has a lot of sodium, not only because dehydrated foods require large amounts of preservatives to stay good, but also because it's important to consume large amounts of sodium to replenish the lost electrolytes from sweat while hiking. So what do? Well, I just don't really concern myself with how much sodium is in the foods that I'm eating, at least while I'm backpacking. When I'm at home, I still watch it, because if you're not sweating, then you're not going to be losing a lot of electrolytes. Remember, this only applies to backpacking meals. All right, so that's it. Those are the foods I've learned that work best with my system with having Crohn's disease. And again, I cannot stress this enough. I am not a registered dietitian. I only have Crohn's disease, and I've been forced to have to learn about different foods that work for going out in the backcountry, spending days eating the same foods, and having to pack foods that are packable, lightweight, and keep good for several days at a time. So I would suggest anyone who's watching who does struggle with dietary restrictions in the backcountry to simply start off with a basic diet that they know works for them, and then slowly expand from there. Remember, if you're eating a whole lot of foods at once and something's triggering your system, but you're not sure which foods are really safe for you, it's going to be difficult to pinpoint which food is causing the flare-up. But anyways, I appreciate that you've made it this far into the video, and I hope that you found something useful. And as always, if you made it to the very end, congratulations. You're a little bit dumber now. Happy hiking.